bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the rad groups of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more. All featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL. From the great one to the next one. From the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Well, hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of THW Oilers Overtime. This is my sad face because as we record this video, we are about 5 minutes removed from the Oilers losing a stinker in Dallas 4-1, I think was the final score. I don't know. I logged on here before it was officially over. Was it 4-1? Was that the final score? Yeah. So not pretty. So we're going to have a couple of our regulars on here to talk about it and some takeaways and other storylines going on in Edmonton. Brian Swain's with us. Brian, how are you?
Yeah, not doing too bad. This was a pretty deflating one here tonight. To be honest, if we weren't doing this, I probably would have shut it off about halfway through the third too, because it just had that feel that they were not getting it done tonight.
Yeah, this was one of those few games where there was really not much of a feeling the Oilers would come back, right? Like they tend to be a third period team and you never think they're out of the game, but this felt like that game where they just weren't going to make the comeback. And that was unfortunate because you're always in it when you're the Oilers fans, but not tonight so much. Julian Mongillo is with us as well. Julian, how are you?
I'm good. I'm doing better than the Oilers. I actually brought my laptop home and found a stream online because it wasn't on the TV down here in Ontario. But maybe I'm just you guys can use me as a scapegoat tonight. It's all my fault that I watched and they lost. So
no, we were talking about that before we came on. I missed my son's practice to watch the game and that didn't work out. And then you actually watched the full game to get the feed somewhere and that didn't work out. So yeah, maybe we're all bad luck, but hey, they're still playing with a good record, but I'm a little concerned about that record because there's some storylines to take away from this game specifically. I mean, we come in with no Darnel Nurse and now it looks like we got no Duncan Keith. So I wouldn't suggest fans would have been all whatever if Duncan Keith was injured, but the timing's terrible because no Darnel Nurse is your top pair left defenseman, which kind of Duncan Keith takes the role of. And now he's potentially out. We don't know how long. All we know is an upper body injury. He didn't return in the game. Somewhere at the end of the second period, I think is when he got hurt. But Brian, what's your takeaway from that? Like, how bad is that? Like, no Darnel Nurse, so now we have no Duncan Keith, and we don't know for how long.
Well, I'll take a deep breath first. I mean, I haven't, and just checking before we came on here to see if there was any updates. I haven't heard anything. Who knows? He could be playing again against Arizona on Wednesday. Yeah. By the same token, he could be out for the year, right? But until we know, obviously, I know we were messaging about this earlier in the week about how impressed we've been, I think, with Keith, right, to this point, and I've been impressed with his endurance, his speed, just his overall conditioning. He's a big loss. You're not going to fill that. I mean, between him and Nurse gone, it's there's no sugarcoating that. If that is the case, then the Oilers are in a really tough spot. If I can go glass at least quarter full on this, there's so many exciting young defensive prospects in this organization, and I mean we've already seen it with Broberg getting called up a couple games ago now. If this is an opportunity to get to see what those guys have, then that's at least an exciting part about that. But I mean, it's obviously for the here and now, it's not going to help the team win more games.
Yeah, I wrote an article a few days ago asking if Duncan Keith could sort of step in and play the minutes that Darnel Nurse would take on. So I didn't expect him to play 30 minutes a game, but I did kind of wonder if he could jump from 18 to 20 to 23, and he played 25 and 25 in the last two games that he was in, around there anyway, not exactly 25, but he looked okay. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it's not going to be the end of the world. Darnel Nurse isn't going to be out very long. It might be a couple weeks, 5 or 6 games tops, and then we'll have him back. But now, who knows? So the glass is half empty. I mean, you're talking about it's more like drinking backwash. That's how little your glass is full right now. But it's going to be interesting, right? Because, like you said, Broberg playing big minutes. I thought he looked pretty good. Julian, what about you? Like, what do you think this looks like for the Oilers if it's Broberg, if it's Chris Russell? No Slater Cuckoo, by the way, remember? He's hurt too. So it's really, really weak on that left side.
yeah, this is a big punch to the gut. I mean, talk about kicking a team while they're down. After losing Nurse, Duncan Keith seamlessly stepped into that top pair role, and just ate up the minutes just like we expected him to. And didn't look out of place because he's done it for his whole career. So to lose a guy like that, especially when your depth is a little bit gone and your number one guy's already gone, that's a lot to make up. And you're going to have to lean on some really young guys to shoulder that load. And, they did not look really good at all in this game. And it almost looked like they were missing that leadership on the back end or some sort of voice, because they were always enduring pressure. It was almost like they were backing into Skinner, letting Dallas come in on the forecheck and play around the boards and then get pucks in front of the net. So that they couldn't even tie up sticks. They had, how many tip-ins were there? Almost, I think 3 of their 4 goals were off tip-ins or something like that, or at least 2, at least 2. So, just kind of maybe some inexperienced plays where you should be tying up guys' sticks in front of the net. I think they did miss some sort of veteran presence on the back end, and it's going to be a big hill to climb if this is a long-term injury for Keith as well.
Well, I'll go with Brian on this one in terms of what Philip Broberg looked like. I thought he looked really good. In fact, I thought he looked good in both of the games. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, led the team in shots tonight. Like, not just from defensemen, but from defensemen and forwards. So he looked really good. I thought he looked pretty solid. Now, saying that, and this is why people worry about his age of Duncan Keith, right? Mike Smith's a little older, an injury that was expected to be short-term turned out to be quite long-term. Duncan Keith, 39 years old or whatever he is, 38 years old. So you don't know, right? When you get a guy in this age, you hope that something small doesn't turn out to be long, but I don't think Broberg on his own is going to be able to do this. So what do you think, Brian? Is this a situation where if this happens to be the Duncan Keith is hurt for a little while, Darnel Nurse is out for a few more games, do the Oilers need to go and look around the league and see what's out there for a left shot defenseman?
Yeah, I mean, big if, because like I say, we'll see what the word is.
Sure.
He could be out for just a couple of games, but yeah, if it's long term, I think you absolutely have to. When that injury happened, I just started running through my head what some of the potential combinations could be, given that Cuckoo, who can play both left and right, is out, Nurse out. I mean, I think Lagesson is going to get a shot, but I mean, now if you're looking at the top 6, I don't know what let's say that Keith is hurt at least for one game. Who are they rolling out tomorrow night? I mean, it's scary to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tricky because you don't necessarily have a true number one right-handed defenseman.
Nope.
Like, you've got Barry, who people will argue is not a top pair defenseman on the right side. Cece, who has played pretty good, but again, probably not a top pair right guy.
Perfect for that second pairing. I think that's exactly where he belongs.
And with the right partner, he does really well. With the wrong partner, it's probably not going to go very well. Evan Bouchard has looked extremely good, but like tonight, he didn't look so hot. There was a lot. No, credit to Dallas. They were all over the Oilers. Like, they were stripping pucks and taking them away. I don't know what the takeaways were in the game tonight, but there was a lot of them. So, and it wasn't just on Bouchard, but that pressure got to him a little bit, right? So if you're playing him that many minutes in the top pair, and I certainly, let's say, for example, you put Broberg in the top pair because you don't have another choice, I wouldn't put Bouchard and Broberg together. Like, that just screams inexperience. You can't do that, right? So, okay, I'll ask Julian the same question that Brian just asked me. What would you do? Are you going to go, do you move Broberg up to that top pair on the left side? And if so, who do you put with him?
I think if I'm Tippett, I'm leaving that CC Broberg pair as it is on the second pair, and I'll bump up Chris Russell with Bouchard. I think he can help be that, at least some sort of a calming presence and a veteran that Bouchard will be able to lean on, like he's had with Nurse and Keith there. So I think that's kind of the best way to do it. And then, let Lagesson, he hasn't played in a while now, so, give him those minutes with Barry. And if it so happens that Lagesson can, give you a little bit more, then you maybe switch Lagesson with Russell at some point on the left side. That could be interchangeable, but for now, I think you have to put a back with a veteran with Bouchard on that line.
I think too, the other interesting thing to know, and curious to get your guys' thoughts on this too, is if Keith is out there, I'm sure somebody else is getting the call from Bakersfield. Mm-hmm. Who is that going to be?
Well, they called Lagesson, like you said.
Lagesson is up, but I think
he's already up, and hasn't played yet. But he hasn't, from what I understand, looked terribly good. And so it's a real question mark. Is Samorukov a lefty?
Yeah, I know.
He is.
Is he?
Yes, he is. I'm looking at it right now.
If he is, then that might be the option. But then again, there's some health questions. He looked pretty good when he is healthy, but he was injured for a while. So I don't know, but I can't even imagine if your left side is, Broberg, Samorukov, Legason, and Russell.
Yeah.
So, I think we
tough.
just answered our own question there about, do they need to go out and look for getting somebody?
Yeah,
I'd
but
say
what can
so.
you do? Nobody's making
Yeah.
a trade right now. Like if you're looking at a Ben Sherrod or you're looking at a whatever, they're not going to get traded right now. Even if Montreal just is terrible the rest of the way, it's going to be a couple months before the Montreal Canadiens make that deal, unless the Oilers are willing to give up a first round pick right now. You know what I mean? And I don't know that you do that. Do you? Like maybe you do that if you think that's the thing that puts you over the edge headed towards the playoffs. Let's cross our fingers. Let's just hope that this is not a long-term thing for Duncan Keith. And we'll hope that Darnel Nurse's injury, which was said not to be terribly serious, a broken finger, obviously, but nothing they needed surgery, is really as short windowed as they think it's going to be, which is only a handful of games. So the Oilers, and we talked about the banking of points early on with a nice record, right? This is where it comes in really handy, because if the Oilers go on a streak here and they lose, say, 3 or 4 in a row, then you've got at least a little cushion in which you're still in that playoff hunt. You won't be leading the Pacific Division. I don't know where Calgary and Chicago's at tonight, but it was 2-2 last I saw. So I don't know. Let's switch gears a little bit. You guys are watching THW Oilers Overtime. If you're just tuning in now, we appreciate it. Brian, let's talk a little bit about Stuart Skinner. We didn't have you on last week, I don't think, right? And we were really wanting to talk about it. And we are thinking, oh man, Skinner's making his debut. He wins the game. And it was kind of like, okay, let's talk to Brian about Stuart Skinner. So let's do it tonight. What have you thought about Stuart Skinner's play so far? This was a tough one for him tonight, but I wouldn't suggest that any of the goals tonight were his fault. The breakaway might have been the closest, but that was a pretty good move on him. So I wouldn't blame him for any of the goals tonight. So what have you thought about Stuart Skinner's play so far?
Yeah, tonight was a good lesson for everybody, including myself, to temper our expectations and remind ourselves that he is only in his 6th NHL game. So he's not. But I've been thrilled with how he's performed so far. You're right. Tonight, I don't think he can be blamed for anything. I just really love his poise and composure. I think is what I think. To start with, he's a very fundamentally sound goalie. He's got size. He knows how to use it to his benefit. But I just love his composure and that he doesn't get rattled by goals. We saw it when he made that horrible giveaway against Detroit a couple of weeks ago. He bounced right back from that. Just his confidence, I think, is what is going to set him apart. And he's showing that already this early in his career. So I've been saying all along, I think this could be, not that he is, but he could be the guy that is their goalie of the future. And, we're seeing very small sample sizes here, but I think that anyone would have to agree that there's an indication that there's something there with this kid.
I'm certainly of the opinion that they're going to give him a couple of years as a backup. You know what I mean? Like they'll sign an extension with him. They'll make sure that he's the backup goalie, and then they might go out and try to figure out what to do. Whether it's Mike Smith, and we don't know what his injury situation is going to be, but Koskinen is going to be a pending UFA, so I'm assuming he's going to be gone. But speaking of Koskinen, Julian, obviously Koskinen's probably going to get the start as people watch this video, be Arizona tonight, back to back. I'm assuming you go with Koskinen, but does Tippett run one too many games with Skinner? Like Skinner looked great, but Tippett has this tendency as a head coach to play the hot goalie maybe one too many times. Like I said, I don't blame Skinner for any of the goals tonight, but it might have been not a bad decision to put Koskinen in. What's your opinion on that?
I think he made the right move just because, a young goalie, he earned his way to another start to me. And, he's getting one of the 2 games, and he's just played well enough that he deserves to get the first one. I think that it gives Skinner the confidence and trust, knowing that the coach trusts him. And I think that goes a long way, rather than him getting the second game and, getting an easier team, but maybe a slower Oilers team off the start. I think they're going to actually have a good game tomorrow, a bounce back game, which that's my prediction. But I think he made the right decision. And I think you can't fault him for any of the goals that that were against him tonight. And even the ones in the last game against Chicago, those ones weren't his fault either. Couple of 2-on-0s and from DeBrincat against Chicago. So I think he's played well, and I think he's played well enough to warrant him coming back. And I think if he's your guy to split with somebody else next year, I think they're in a good position, and even better one than they are this year.
Yeah, I'll go back and say even the game against Winnipeg, I think the only goal he let in was a Nick Ehlers shot, and that Nick Ehlers shot was unreal.
Yeah.
Like that was a crazy wicked shot. So yeah, the Detroit gaff that Brian mentioned earlier, that was the only real kind of flub up by Skinner at any point this season.
I think that's the big thing you can say about him, and you can't. And I like Koskinen, but you can't say this about him. There's at least once every 2 games, there's a goal with Koskinen is just like an absolute groaner, right? It's like he should have had that, and you can just see how it affects the team. Skinner hasn't had that outside.
And he's kept them in the games. There was a couple of big saves that he made to even keep him in this one tonight, right? And Koskinen does do that from time to time, but Skinner's been there and he's been pretty solid and dependable on the back as the last line of defense, and even a couple 2-on-1s tonight, and he's came up big.
Yeah, to be fair to Koskinen, we talk about the flubbers that he lets in and the groaners, as Brian said, but we should give him credit where it's deserved. He has kept the Oilers in a lot of games, and he has made some 10-bill saves in the same game that he lets in a stinker, right? Like but you remember, you can have 10 really awesome saves and 1 real stinker, and it's the stinker we all talk about. So that's kind of the deal with Koskinen. But I'll say this, and I maybe should knock on wood when I do this, because the Oilers have a tendency sometimes to play down to teams that are much lower than them. They're playing Arizona. So hopefully this is one of those games where it's a perfect timing when you come off a stinker like you had in Dallas, that you get a team that's as bad as Arizona is, right? So let's hope that I'm not jinxing the team by saying that when I make that comment, but we'll see. I do have a question though. Julian, I'll start with you on this one. The Oilers are getting knocked a lot. I mean, coming into the game tonight, I think both NHL analysts on, I don't know if it was NHL.com or the NHL Network or what have you, said that Dallas would probably win, and figured that Calgary would win tonight against Chicago, which would kind of flip the script a little bit on the standings and where Calgary's at and the Oilers. What's your take on the whole, everybody looks at the Oilers and not sure if they're legit, and then everybody looks at Calgary and says, well, this is a legit team because they depress goals, they don't let you shoot, they don't let you score, they have the leading, I think, most shutouts in the NHL so far for any team. When you look at these two teams, do you get the same sense that some of the people outside of Edmonton get, which is the Oilers aren't for real, but Calgary might be?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of the old school style that people just kind of take into consideration. And, Sutter's always been defensive first, and he's implemented a system there that's worked very well. And they have the right players that are, stepping up and playing the way they want to play. And the Oilers are just built differently, and that's fine. Everybody's built their own way. And for them, what's important is that they embrace how they want to play. So, they went head to head earlier on this season, and it was like the Flames were too concerned about, hitting and maybe, slowing down their big guns, where the Oilers were just able to outskate them and just outwork them and with speed and skill. So I think there's ways to counteract it. I do think that, Calgary could be more playoff ready, let's say, but I don't think that it solely depends on playing a rougher, tougher game that's going to lead to success in the playoffs. I think the Oilers are still just as good with all the players they have, and they'll add pieces in there for sure. And we've seen teams like the Leafs, they haven't been able to put it together, and they're kind of built the same way on speed and skill. And they've always added that grit. The grit and that factor is always something you can add after. But I don't think that it's something that will prevent them from excelling in the playoffs.
Well, I was just going to ask Brian the same question. Like, do you believe the narrative here that the Oilers are going to struggle when it comes to the playoffs, and the Calgary Flames are going to feel right at home with the way that they're playing hockey right now? Like, it's hard to go who's the better team and have a direct answer here, but I guess it depends on when you're looking at these two teams and at what point in the season. But what's your take on this? Calgary's ready for the playoffs, the Oilers are going to struggle.
Yeah, well, I thought Julian summed it up there perfectly. I think if you're just a casual outside observer, one reason that you might have more confidence in the Flames is the goaltending situation. We all know that goaltending is huge in playoffs. That's why we talk about it all the time. But what are the Oilers going to do? Are they going to add a goalie at the deadline, et cetera, et cetera? And I think that's a much more stabilized situation, and a situation you can feel confident in if you're in Calgary right now. As far as being more ready for the playoffs, I mean, the Flames do seem to play that token, stereotypical playoff style of hockey more than the Oilers do. But I think Julian, like he said, like there's ways to counteract that, and it's embracing your style of play, and exploiting that to your advantage. There's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah, and as we speak now, we started this show, it was 2-2. It's now 5-2 for Calgary. So not only did they shut Chicago down a little bit, they've won the game now 5-2. So they scored 3 in the third period. So not only can they shut you down, but apparently they have the ability to score 3 goals in one period and take over the game.
But the Oilers scored 4 against Chicago in one period. So
yeah, and I'm not saying that no team should be able to do that, but I'm saying it might look like Calgary's got both of those tools in their toolbox, right? Like they've got some skill to be able to put some goals in there in a hurry. And then they're buying into Darryl Sutter's system, like you guys said, right? And they're shutting you down until they can take off on you. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Closing the show off, let's switch gears and ask one more question that I didn't tell you guys I was going to ask you before we came on the air here, but we'll do it anyway. Brian, I'll start with you. Last 3, 4, 5 games of the Oilers, is there a player on this roster, somebody who's maybe stepped up, somebody who surprised you, somebody who's kind of, I wouldn't say wowed you? And let's look outside, maybe McDavid and Draisaitl. By the way, for those that didn't know, McDavid's point streak ended tonight at 25 games. So he did not get a point in this game against the Dallas Stars, which means that the 17 games that he was scoring this season plus the other, 8 last season, that's over now. So we can put that one to bed. McDavid does not get a point for the first time this season. But Brian, is there another player that has sort of impressed you and has come on here a little bit lately?
Well, I'm going to also disqualify myself from saying Stuart Skinner. So Ryan McLeod, though, has been great. He's looked like a different man since he's been recalled. I think he's contributing in all aspects of the game. And now that was his 3rd goal tonight, right?
Yeah.
Which I think if you're getting goals from him, I think that's a bonus. I know he's got a bit of a reputation. He's a bit of a streak scorer. I know he's gone on some nice runs in the AHL of putting up goals, but I don't see that being his role over the long term in the NHL. So to be able to see him contributing that way too, he's playing with great confidence. I just love players like him that you can just plug into any role and be able to contribute. And so that he would get my vote.
Yeah, I was going to say him. I'll pick a different one when we get around to me, but I've liked his 3 goals because they've all been kind of different, right? The first one, he kind of drove up the center of the ice and got a rebound on his own shot, I think it was, and scored. The second one was a nice deep backhand off a nice pass where he was wide open. And the third one tonight was a 2-on-1, a pretty pass from Draisaitl. So he's scored in different ways, and his speed is just something else. Like, just to watch him, he's like watching McDavid skate, but without the stick handling ability. Like, he's just that fast. Like, he's really, really good. Julian, who would you pick? Is there a player on this team that sort of impressed you over the last 5 games?
Yeah, the guy I would pick is probably Kailer Yamamoto. I just think that he's kind of embraced his role in the penalty kill more than ever now. Couple shorthanded goals, and he's just playing. He's kind of got that swagger back that he had. He looks like he's having fun now again, and starting to find that chemistry on that line again. So I think he's liking his game right now, and you're seeing it build off those positive things that he's had happen to him, and he's doing smaller things right here and there. So I think he's slowly getting back to where he was a couple of years ago. And on the flip side, I just want to add that, there's some guys like Zach Hyman has been abysmal, if not, very, very disappointing the last couple of games. Haven't seen much of him. And I'd like to see him be that more of that energizer guy that we talked about before, where, he's being effective in some way, whether that's hitting, whether that's forechecking, retrieving pucks, stuff like that. So I think we need to see more from him, and especially with these guys potentially being out and having to carry a bigger load on the back end.
Yeah, it's a little tough when you've gone on such a streak like Hyman did for a while and scored a bunch of goals. Then all of a sudden, when you don't get one for a while, even Jesse Puljujarvi is in the same situation, right? Like, he scored a ton, and then all of a sudden he hasn't really scored in a while. Those were both good picks. Those would have been in the first 2 on my list, but I'm going to go with Warren Foegele. I think Warren Foegele has looked extremely effective in the last handful of games. In fact, he might be the best forward in the top 9 when guys like, if you're excluding Draisaitl and McDavid and things like that, right? He's been so steady. Like, there's just, even when the rest of the guys are streaky and not scoring or doing whatever, and we mentioned a couple names there, Foegele just seems to keep playing his game, seems to be north-south all the time. And he's just dogged on the puck. Like he's just constantly in your face. And I thought he played fantastic tonight. He doesn't often get rewarded. He doesn't normally get the goal, but he creates a lot. And that's what I've really liked about his game.
I think if he got an opportunity to play with McDavid, I think he's a 20 goal scorer for sure.
Well, he's exactly what they said he would be.
Yeah.
Right. When they traded Ethan Bear for him, they said, "Here, we want a guy that'll go to the net. We want a guy that'll drive, that'll, forecheck these. The analytics are great in terms of like his underlying number. Like, he's exactly what they said he would be. He hasn't necessarily scored a ton. I don't know what he's got in the season, 2 goals or something, but it's just it's fun to watch him because he just never stops. He's like a bigger version of Kailer Yamamoto, right? Like he's got the body, he's got the size, and he maybe doesn't have the hands that Yamamoto does. And if Yamamoto chose to shoot more, he would score more. But Foegele's just gonna, grind you down, beat you down, tire you out, right? Like and it's fun to watch it because it's extremely effective when your top guys aren't going. You still have that sort of aspect to your game. So I've really liked his game as well. Let's make a prediction here before we close things off officially. So when people watch this, it's going to be the Arizona Coyotes against the Oilers. I don't know what our record is. We talked about this with Brian before we came on here to see how many times when we record this on a Tuesday that the Oilers are playing, do we actually jinx the team by having them not play very well? I wonder what our record is for predicting these games too. But Julian, I'll start with you. What's the score of the Oilers versus Arizona Coyotes Wednesday night?
I think they'll put forth a better effort. I'm going to go with a 4-2 win.
Okay. Brian, what about you?
Big bounce back, 5-1, 3 points each for McDavid and Draisaitl.
Ooh, nice. Yeah, I believe Draisaitl and McDavid will have a good game. I'm a little concerned with what this blue line's going to look like, though. Like, it depends. No Nurse, potentially no Keith. Like, if that happens, the Oilers could put up a lot. Like, the Arizona could have put up a lot of shots. And if that happens, I'm sure that a couple are going to squeak in. So I'll say the Oilers win at 5-3, but I think that no matter who's in net, Koskinen or Skinner, and it's probably going to be Koskinen, that many shots is going to equal a couple goals. So I'll go 5-3. I say the Oilers win, but I do believe they'll win. I think after coming out against, and they're pretty good on back-to-backs, the second nights of back-to-backs, their record's pretty decent there. So you play that crappy game against Dallas where they outwork you, they outplay you. And we talked about the lack of penalty calls, but the Oilers still deserve to lose this game. Like they didn't get any calls. I think they had 1 power play, which wasn't even a power play. It was like 4-on-4, and they got like 30 seconds of power play time, but that still wouldn't have changed the game, like not having those calls. So it is what it is. All right, guys. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully we'll have Colton back with us next week and we'll get the full panel on here. For everybody else, there's a couple ways that you can watch the content, get a hold of what we're doing. You can check out any of these guys on the panel here, their work at thehockeyraiders.com. There's tons of articles about the Oilers. You can join the newsletter with the Hockey Raiders, morningskate.io. You can sign up for that. Check out the YouTube page, facebook.com/thehockeyraiders, Twitter at the Hockey Raider. There's lots of ways you can get a hold of us. So we enjoyed talking to you guys again this week. We thank you for coming on and joining us. Put your comments in there, ask questions, let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll do that next week. Brian, thank you. Julian, thank you. This has been another edition of THW Oilers Overtime. We'll talk to you guys next week.